Greetings and welcome back to the Shibori Saga. On this episode I'm going to be showing you some bead embroidery techniques on how we're going to decorate the front of the piece with all of our beads. This one works a little differently than traditional bead embroidery, where you don't have to stitch every single bead one at a time. You basically just work in curves in order to keep the shape of the structure, but we also can bead through multiple beads at the same time, which is pretty cool. A little bit quicker. Basically, what we want to do is kind of take a look at the piece and see where beads need to be put. Usually around the edges and the borders to kind of cover the ribbon, rough edges, and to keep the shape that we want, a nice uniform, in my case, iris shape. Then, we need to consider the top and bottom pieces to cover the pleats, and to make sure that everything kind of is in a neat, polished place. Up top, we're also going to need to attach the bail, so we kind of have to compensate for that. And then in the middle, it's kind of more of our freeform project. We kind of see how the waves and the curves of the pleats form, so we're kind of want to put beads in there to kind of emphasize and accent the project. Another thing you'd want to consider is larger focal beads and where we'd want to put this. Even though this technique is really kind of slap it on and do whatever, it's still kind of recommended to work in an up and down motion. And what I mean is, basically you stick to a point. Like for starters, I'm going to be starting with the little bit of the accent bead here, then I'm going to work down to the border, I'm going to do some accents here, work back up, and then do whatever intermediary pieces in an up and down motion. Basically, if I want to put something here, I'll move down here, up here, and keep going like that. Just so that it kind of keeps the stitches neat in the background, and so that it kind of just makes everything not tangle up on itself. Okay, so I've laid all my beads out, and basically, the sizes and the shapes kind of tell you what purpose they're doing. Your seed beads are basically your go-to fillers for anything that is really out of place, and there's like this wide gap, or there's edges that are showing. You kind of just stick them in places that you want. The larger 4mm beads and such are basically used for larger focal points, and basically anything that you really just want to draw attention to. Anything smaller, like 3mm, kind of also are gap fillers as well. And they kind of make transition points from, between like seed beads and 4mm. And then I have these larger freshwater pearls that I want even to use as even larger focal points. And to kind of just bring it out the piece a bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, this is the same thread that I used to attach the ribbon with. So I'm just going to basically start at the blank corner and decide what I want to put on the end. So what I think I would like to do is I'm just going to stick on a seed bead. Actually, we'll make that 2 seed beads. 2 seed beads, a 4mm, and a couple more seed beads, and we'll see where that gets me. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to push all my beads down, and then I'm going to kind of move them around to determine what space the beads will take. And then I'm going to put my needle in right about where the beads end. You always kind of want to play with it and push and pull and determine where you exactly want your beads to go. So I end up with that. Once that's anchored down, what I'm going to do is reinforce it. So I'm going to go back up behind the beads and basically make a whip stitch. So I'm behind the beads again, and I'm going to pull through all 4 of the beads again. This also kind of straightens the beads so they don't form an arc, and they sit nicely. Like that. So I'm going to actually go back down, and I'm going to go up in the opposite direction and do the same on the other side. So I'm going to take a spot right next to that. Gonna add on another 2 seed beads, another 4mm, another 2 seed beads. I'm gonna push down, and then play with the positioning. And I'm gonna make sure that I've pushed the beads all the way down so where it's gonna lay is where it's gonna stay. So I'm going to put my needle back down through pretty much exactly where the bead ends. So that it sits flat instead of, if you make the stitch too small, the beads are going to round over and basically stick up above the work, which can be an interesting effect, but not exactly what I want. So see how everything is a little flat in this spot? Let's see. Now I'm going to go back through and reinforce everything again. And kind of make sure everything sits in place. Like that. Now I have this little gap over here that I kind of want to fill in. And then I think I want to make a little bitty border over here as well. So I think I'm just going to make a little triangle shape to kind of join everything together. And I'm going to reinforce it. Like that. Now I've got this little itty bitty gap right here that a 3mm bead would probably fit best in. So I'm just going to slide in my needle in between there, stick on a 3mm pearl, and set it down. And that's what I have. Now there's all these little gaps that are in between the spaces, between the beads, that I would probably fill in, that I'm going to fill in with seed beads. So after I've reinforced the pearl, I'm going to go back over here, put on a couple of seed beads, and stamp it in place over here. Our objective is basically to just fill in the blank space with the beads and work out where we need to go. Now that that bit is done, I'm going to move around and work my way to the edge of the piece, and I want to work down here and fill in this spacing here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in the edges here and just kind of determine the border of the project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually sneak up behind these two seed beads that are right at the corner underneath this red 4mm here. I'm going to pass through those two seed beads again, and I am going to basically start off creating the border. So I'm going to add on a few seed beads. And since this curve is not very sharp, I don't really have to worry about changing direction so often, so I can go through more beads at once. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So, let's see. 1, 2, 3. Let's go with 5, 6. Going to work just like I've been doing, putting the beads down. I'm going to position where I want the beads to fall. And then I'm going to stitch right where the last bead ends. Okay? And I end up with a small border like that. Now what I'm going to do to reinforce this, I'm going to go behind the beads that I just added and pass through them again. Then from here, I'm ready to add on my new beads, or my next set of beads. Like this. The reinforcing is also great because if you kind of want to change the position and tweak it a little bit, you didn't stitch it where you want it to be immediately, you can kind of adjust it and tweak it to where you need. So I'm going to go ahead and add some more beads. And kind of lay it down to where I want it to go. Might want to add on a couple more. Push it down. And then put my stitch down to where the last bead ends. Like that. Then we're going to reinforce it. We're going to basically jump back through the beads we just added. And pass through these beads again to reinforce. Like that. And we're going to do that all the way down to the length of the project. Alright, now that I've got my border done, on this side I'm going to move over to the other peak. And this is another freeform way of doing things, basically with no rules, so it's whatever you would like to do. I personally like to stick a focal or a larger bead on the bottom and then just bead around it, so I'm going to do pretty much just that. And then you can kind of actually see how I followed the curvature of the edge with my stitches. And you can kind of see how many steps that I needed to take in order to make this curve nice and a little smooth. The less beads that you go through, the tighter your curve is going to be and the more accurate you can put your border. But if you're kind of like me, you'll be like, whatever. So I'm going to move to the point, and I'm going to stick on one of these great big pearls. Let's see, that one looks pretty cool. This one kind of turned into my point, so I'm going to stitch it right into the peak. Then I'm going to reinforce it so that it ends up behind the silk. Or on top of the silk, rather. Oh, smush, smush. Go down. There we go. And I've got that piece. What I think I'm going to do is actually border this whole part with beads and kind of form a little bit of a embroidery shape to it. Or a little bit of a point shape to it. So, take a look at how I'm going to do this. I'm going to start at the point. Alright, and now that I have the point pretty much where I want it to be, I'm just going to move up and finish the border on the other side. And I'll see you when I get down there. Alright, and here's my piece so far. I've done the borders around both sides, and I've also taken the liberty and filled in some gaps of showing fabric that I didn't want to be seen, so I kind of covered that up. And now before we do anything else, you probably might end up with very little thread to work with, so I'll show you a quick way to finish your thread. Basically just end up so that your thread is hanging out of the back, and do overhand knots to secure it in place. Basically a double or a triple will be just fine. Making sure you kind of secure it and make sure you have the knots in place. And then go ahead and cut the thread short so that you have a little stubby piece hanging out of your knot. Now don't worry too much about it, because basically to put the backing on, you're just going to glue the whole damn thing. So all the knots that'll be in here will be secured already, and they shouldn't come undone. Now, the piece like this looks very nice by itself, but you might even want to take a look at the pleats and accent them. You got a nice little curve right here that'd be nice to put some beads in. It's pretty much open wide enough for some beads. There might be a few here. You might want to reinforce the border a little bit just to make it pop out a little bit. And yeah, so let's get on to that. In order to attach your thread, you're basically going to do the same thing. We'll find a place that we really want to put our beads, and then put on a knotted thread right through. Okay, so I've got my knotted little thread, and I'm just going to stick it where I want it to go. Now keep in mind, we still want to work in the up-down pattern, so kind of work one corner down to the next corner. So basically up top, put any beads you want down here, go up, put any beads you want, go back down, put any beads you want, etc. So I think I like this place right here. So I'm going to stick my thread through. Now, take a look at the curvature of this one. It's more of an S shape, so we'll need to add fewer beads in order to maintain this shape and kind of emphasize what the silk is doing for ourselves. So I'd say probably 1 to 2 beads at a time, the most, so I will do that right now. I just did my first stitch, and now I'm reinforcing, pulling up, and passing back through the beads that I just added in order to add the next stitch. Now I've got my next beads added, and I'm going to stitch it at a slightly different angle in order to match the direction of the curvature. So I've got my piece. Ow, I'm going to stab myself in the hand. So now you see, if I pull it back, how we've made a little bit of a curved comma shape with the beads. And this is because this is 2 separate stitches instead of stringing them all at the same time. The sharper the curve, the more stitches you're going to need to do. Okay, now I'm going to reinforce this stitch and add on my next beads. Reinforce it in place. Then I'm going to add my final set for this section here. Push it down, and then stitch it at a different angle, so that I have maintained that S shape. I'm going to go ahead and reinforce this set. And then I'm finished with this section, I think. So I'm going to go back down and kind of take a look at where I want to go next. Now with this design, a little goes a long way and less is more. So you kind of want to take in consideration where the most activity, I guess, is going, for the eye is going when it comes to the focus points. I actually think I might add one more here, and then I think I'm gonna call it good. So I'm going to go up. Now I'm gonna move in this direction since I'm going down. And I'm going to just add one bead here. Push it down. And then kind of figure out where it lands. And then I think I'm going to add one more piece higher up, just because. So I'm done with this stitch here. I think I might go up here and change the direction of my beads. So I'm going to add, is that a bronze? Do I want a bronze or do I want a pink? Yeah, I want a bronze. Okay, and then you can kind of see how the beads kind of change the direction of the pleats, so you can kind of have a little bit of creative freedom as to where the silk goes and how that pattern happens. And yeah, after I add this stitch, I think I'm pretty much done. The last steps before you determine that you're finished with your beading is to kind of look over your piece and figure out if there's any more gaps that you want to fill, if there's any more fabric that's kind of just out of place and just kind of looks messed up. Like I might add a few beads on these sides because the fabric is showing a little too much for my liking. But after that, your piece is almost done. I think that does it for this episode. On the next episode, I will show you how to finish off the piece, add your backing and your bail. So I hope you guys are enjoying this so far. Let me know in the comments if there's any specific techniques you'd like me to share with you guys. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.